This is a reminder.
Hi, this is Charlie Hart and a bunch of neurodivergent fellow speakers from the Speakers Collective. Thank you for joining us. So this is the third of our 3 events from the Speakers Collective this year for Neurodiversity Celebration Week. And I've been involved in that for about 4 years now. So it's been really great to be able to platform some of my friends from the Speakers Collective and bring some new and fresh neurodivergent voices to Neurodiversity Celebration Week. So we're just going to introduce ourselves and then do a short talk each and then have quite a fluid discussion, hopefully. So my name's Charlie Hart. I'm also known as Awesome Charlie with an AU for autistic, and I am multiply neurodivergent. I'm a keynote speaker, and I have a 20-year background in HR. Can I ask each of you to introduce yourselves, and then we'll get John to introduce the work of the Speakers Collective, I think. So, Runa.
Thanks, Charlie, and thanks for having me here today. And hello, everybody. Well, my name's Runa Uddin, and currently I am a freelance trainer consultant. Basically, my work focuses on all things mental health, trauma, and workplace well-being. Actually, to be honest, it could be anything as long as the outcome is that we're working towards humanizing workplaces, because for me, that was a game changer that literally saved my life. And so that's where I'm at. I'm also neurodivergent. I didn't have like a diagnosis until much later on in life. Something you probably have heard like a lot of people talk about, but that's because, I guess that's what we're going to be exploring later on. And I guess the reason why I'm here, it's not just for like professional reasons. It is the fact that actually I've always felt like a little bit weird, a little bit off. People have found me a little bit unrelatable. I found them quite unrelatable. And so actually, you know, kind of putting all of that together, trying to be who I am, the best of who I am. That just sounds like a really garbled way of introducing. I really hate that.
It was great.
Yeah. But that is how
I love those neurodivergent rambling monologues.
That's my rambling. That's my intro.
How about you, John? Could you introduce yourself?
Yeah, well, firstly, thank you, Charlie, for putting on all these talks and events today. Yes, it's only Monday, but yeah, it feels like you've already achieved so much already. So, yeah, my name's John Salmon. I'm I guess like I'm a co-CEO of Speakers Collective along with Joe Emerson. So trying to guide this ship we call the Speakers Collective in the right direction. Speakers Collective was established in 2017, really just as a space to support people that were sharing their lived experience, to challenge stigma, facilitate important conversations. So I think we're ticking all of those boxes tonight. We've got over 180 members now that are talking about everything from physical health, mental health, disability, neurodiversity, everything that you can really imagine that comes from a place of stigma and discrimination. And it's an absolute privilege to be part of the collective myself, where I talk about being dyslexic and the mental health challenges I had when I was younger, and kind of the work that I do. So yeah, it's great to be here, and I'm really looking forward to the conversation.
Thank you, John. I don't get to hear from you very often, to be honest, because you do a lot of organising and arranging and platforming people, and very rarely do I get to hear you talk. So I'm looking forward to this evening.
Thank you.
Chandy, over to you. Could you introduce yourself?
Sorry, I'm Chandy. I'm a mental health speaker and disability advocate. I talk about my life with a brain tumour beyond the age of 3. And how I've never really known anything but being disabled, and kind of talk about the social model of disability, which I'll come on to a bit later. But I recently discovered that I might be neurodivergent in respect of having potential autism and ADHD, but I've also got OCD, which also falls into that category of neurodivergent behaviours. And so I'm learning to understand myself as I grow older, and just constantly learning new things about myself and how I might be disabled in the world that we live in.
Thank you very much. And Amit, over to you, please. Could you?
Hi, Amit Kali. So, former deputy head teacher in secondary education.
and now run my own kind of coaching business and storytelling business, where I coach parents predominantly and help them sort of navigate the 21st century challenges of parenting, of which there are many, and also share my story of losing my mum to cancer, having a daughter born with 3 holes in her heart, and more recently, to add to that story, being diagnosed as an adult with ADHD, OCD, and anxiety disorder, with a particular focus actually on raising awareness of neurodiversity in the South Asian community, where I think it's woefully misunderstood or not understood at all. And so, just try and do a lot more work in that space, really. And thank you again, Charlie, for organising and for having me.
Thank you for being here. And yes, I agree, that's a really important intersectionality to explore. So I'm going to come to each of you and ask you to do like a lightning talk, and I'll spotlight you while I'm doing that. So you won't see the rest of us, just yourselves. But if I come to you first, Runa. So I'll just spotlight you. Okay.
I might
Go for it.
spotlight. Brilliant. Thank you. Do you know, I was thinking about what to kind of like talk about, because 300 million ideas go through my mind, like literally what feels like 10 seconds. And one of the things that I've noticed that a lot of people talk about when they talk about neurodiversity, I always feel, I don't know if that's their experience, but I always feel like they know what they're talking about, like they've learned about it, it makes sense, they can articulate it. And I have to be honest, I think what I want to kind of talk about is actually not having a clue really how my kind of brain works. Like it still feels like a learning process. It's because growing up, you know, I've had other things, like, for example, the reason why I work in the mental health space is because of my lived experience of mental health problems, like the suicide element, trauma, anxiety, all of those, and depression is something that I've like really managed. And then it never occurred to me about the ADHD thing, to be honest, because it's not something we talked about. You know, back when I was at school, ADHD was something that naughty boys had. And, you know, and they were really hyperactive and all of that kind of stuff. But the reality was is that I wasn't physically hyperactive, but it was almost like my brain was a naughty boy, so to speak.
Yes.
And it was just like always going round and round. Like my brain, I knew I was always different, because sometimes I just couldn't keep up with the thoughts. It was like, it's like having 50 browser tabs open at the same time, but then there's this random like music playing in, coming in.
Yeah.
Suddenly, like there's also like a farm of animals mooing away at the background. Like it's so random.
20 tabs, one's frozen, and you don't know where the music's coming from.
Yeah. And so even though if you were to see me like at a bus stop or something, I could be like that. That's what you would see. My brain would have been like, literally like that. So I knew that I was always different. I knew that, you know, even though I didn't have like a diagnosis until like much later, there was always something different about me. I knew that. People around me knew that. It was just really, really hard to kind of put my finger on. And so for me, it's really weird, but somehow my personal life and career have kind of like, they've sort of come together, and everything just feels like a discovery. So that's kind of where I'm at. And I think there are several like layers when it comes to my neurodiversity, because first of all, you know, we're all intersectional beings. That's the reality of it. We all have like very, very different like attributes. As you can see, you know, I'm a woman, I'm a person of color, I have lived experience of mental health conditions, but I also have ADHD. And so it's really hard to kind of say, like, you know, when we talk about masking, well, the thing is, sometimes I wonder, what is ADHD and what is being a South Asian woman? Because we are meant to be good. We cannot be too emotional, but we have to be sensitive and all of those kind of things. And you sort of mask and become like you kind of, I mean, I've certainly found that I've had to condition myself to be a certain way to be accepted. So it's really hard to kind of say, like, what is a culturally motivated thing? What's an ADHD thing? What could be a trauma thing? So like I said, it's going back to that narrative of sometimes like just not like I don't have a clue how to kind of pin it down. All I can do is kind of talk about that lived experience, you know. And even when we're talking about a lot of colleagues and peers in this space have talked about trauma. And like, we know that trauma is essentially your survival system, right? Just becoming like hyper aware because of the threats that and the experiences and the trauma that people have experienced. And there seems to be some sort of like link, like this is anecdotal, but there seems to be like a link between the two. So sometimes, again, I'm not sure, is this an ADHD thing? This is a trauma thing where I'm like, you know, is this right? Am I reacting too much? You know, is this facts or interpretation made by my mind? Or, you know, am I being difficult? Am I just too much? Or is it my brain malfunctioning? So there's that to kind of like figure out. I mean, it feels like a lot, doesn't it? It's even now.
I'm
like,
trying not to interrupt you, but I'm like, I want to say something.
I'm just trying to get it out because, guess what? Forgetting is also a thing that we have. So if I just get it out and I get it out of my system, then but the emotional overwhelm, like I've literally got notes here and I'm thinking if I just throw it out to everybody now and get it over with, I could now, and my brain can hopefully slow down. But, you know, the truth of the matter is that, like, I don't see it a bad thing. I think having that diagnosis and now working with a coach who helps me to understand, who is also has ADHD, and, you know, it's been super helpful because I can think back to things and everything starts to make sense. Like the really weird stuff I used to do, you know, like for example, my mum used to teach us how to make curries because obviously growing up we had to please our husbands and all of that, and cooking was a really big part of that. And she was very like specific. The thing is though, I just remember not being able to follow rules. Like, it's not that I can't follow 100% rules. I don't know if this resonates or not, but I have to just break. I just have to break a little bit of the rule. Like, for example, she'd be like, you have to do it this way. And then when she's not looking, I've put in like a bit of ketchup or mayonnaise or something like that. Something really random that she would be disgusted at that I put in the curry. And literally I felt better. Or like Ramadan, we had to fast. Ironically, is Ramadan now. And I just couldn't cope with fasting, like no food and drink. So I'd have a sip of water. And then after that, I would literally fast by the book. But I had to break it just that tiny bit. I'm pretty sure that if my parents saw this, I'd be in dead trouble. But just putting that out there. So it was just so many things. I think I've run out of time.
It's okay. I'm not actually timing any of these. It was kind of a rough guide, like 3 to 5 minutes each. But wow, there's so much. There's so much I want to say to you. It's really refreshing to hear a neurodiversity advocate who doesn't think they know everything. So your really humble approach and knowing that you're at the bottom of a learning curve is really great to hear, because lived experience is really, really important. But quite often people are still in the learning curve and they're educating others when they've only touched the tip of the iceberg. So it's just fantastic to hear that. And totally with you on the intersectional being thing as well, because I am a woman. I am autistic and ADHD. I have complex PTSD. I'm a parent of neurodivergent kids. I'm a wife. I'm on my second husband. I think I'll keep this one. I'm a bereaved mother as well. I lost my eldest son to suicide, so I've been through that as well. So I am the sum of my physiology and my environment and my experiences. And you can't support me unless you've got an idea of the holistic view of me rather than just, oh, she's autistic. So it's a really good perspective to look at it through. And as the Black lesbian poet Audre Lorde said, there's no such thing as a single issue, because we're not single issue people. So, or something like that, yeah. So thank you. John, over to you.
Well, yeah, just really, really interesting conversations already. So I'll share a little bit about myself. And really, you know, I was kind of diagnosed quite late, having dyslexia. So for me, I felt it was after kind of, or very late into kind of when I was at college. So yeah, I feel like I'd already started to mask my dyslexia and put in some kind of coping mechanisms that I thought would, help me get through this world that wasn't really geared towards my way of thinking, maybe. And yeah, I guess the real kind of problems for me happened in my first job. It was the start of, I'm going to date myself now, it was just before the turn of the millennium in 1999. I was working for an internet company, so very much dial-up days. We would only dream of a setup like we have tonight, all streaming from our homes. But I think kind of some of the challenges that I had during that job was taking on too much work, working weekends, working long hours, not asking for help. Some other things that had happened earlier in my life that I hadn't got help for. But I think as now, when I look back on it, being dyslexic and not asking for help was one of the reasons that I found myself ended up having a psychotic episode, and I ended up sectioned and in hospital just for the turn of the millennium. My mental health and the mental illness I had, it was obviously pretty I can't even say the word, debilitating. And, I was off work for about a year. It took me a good amount of time to get back on my feet. And, I did that. And, I worked out, I think, the things to manage my mental health. So I could spot the signs better when I was feeling stressed or anxious, and definitely, knowing to ask for help. But funnily enough, here I am more comfortable talking about having a mental illness than I have been talking about being dyslexic, because I think really even though, I saw the mental illness as an illness and something that, even though it's something I have to look after and manage, it feels to me like something that I was able to kind of recover from. Whereas being dyslexic, that is me, that is who I am. And some of the jobs that I've worked in over the years definitely felt like an imposter being in these roles. Working with other journalists, I can't even tell, if you ask me now, yeah, which there or there to write, I still get confused. And so, being dyslexic for me was a real shame that I had attached to that. And really, it was only with hearing role models or people that I saw talking about being dyslexic that changed that narrative of something where I just thought it was me being slow or clumsy or just being a bit thick, that actually there were other people out there that were dyslexic and were also making, there were some positive stories around it. And I think that's, really the work that I do around mental health and well-being is really, as cheesy as it sounds, is for my two kids. And really it all comes back to, the way I've been taught, and, there's things I can learn and support I can get to support my being dyslexic and some of the challenges I have. But really fundamentally where we can all hopefully make a difference is with young people. And that, in a group of 100 kids, at least 10 of those children will have dyslexia, but only 2 would currently be diagnosed at school. And as I kind of alluded to, those early identification of being dyslexic would, obviously would have massively impacted on improving my confidence, my self-esteem, and lower levels of anxiety. So I'll hand back to you, Charlie. But really, that's really the core, I think, of, it's still shocking that within the education system, it's not set up for, for everybody. It's not for every child. It's still very much set up for a specific way of thinking. and we need to change the education system to support every single child, not just those 2 out of 100.
Absolutely. So the thing is, dyslexia is the most commonly diagnosed neurodevelopmental condition. So I don't understand how we still haven't got a handle on screening for it in schools, raising children who are dyslexic to not think that they're a failure, but to give them the support and understanding that they need. I just don't know how we've got as far along as we have, and for that still not to be a thing.
Yeah, it's there's free resources out there. There's a number of different organisations. There's Made by Dyslexia that's got a whole host of resources for schools.
Yeah.
But I think until it's really forced in through the curriculum, then it's and the support teachers. Again, it always comes back to teachers having to do everything. They're not getting the training or the time really, or the support. Whether it's teacher assistants that's been cut back. It's not.
Yeah.
It's bigger than just the individual teacher who's. It is the system that needs to be changed.
Definitely. So my kids are autistic and ADHD. They're not dyslexic, but what I see is them struggling at school because of the neuronormative expectations, and then the government and the last government as well, and the one before that as well, they all seem to think that the answer to any problems is to be stricter and more disciplined. And that seems to translate to more neuronormative. So we get ridiculous emails from the school about attendance from my kids, who I would just be happy if they reach adulthood and that they're pretty happy and okay. I don't really care if they have 90% attendance or whatever. And nobody seems to really care about the well-being of the kids and what they really need in order to be able to thrive and not just survive the education system, but actually come out of it okay and as well-rounded adults. So things need to change. It's really sad that you've just got, your brain is wired differently, but that it's carried such shame and being diagnosed so late, and the impact it's then had on your mental health. So I really applaud you for talking about it now and for your role with the Speakers Collective. It's so important. Chandy, we'll come to you now, please.
So I have no idea what I'm going to say. So the next couple of minutes is going to be absolutely just winging it.
Just ramble on, and if you run out of stuff to say, we'll just do a dialogue, okay?
Sounds perfect.
Yeah.
So as I mentioned earlier on, I was diagnosed with a brain tumour at the age of 3. I like to call him Timmy. So for the context of today, I'm just going to call him Timmy rather than pilocytic astrocytoma, because it's a bit of a mouthful to be saying at 7:30 at night. But when I was diagnosed with my brain tumour, that kind of formed my understanding of disability in terms of just being physically disabled. And then when I turned 6, a few months later, I then had to go in for surgery again, and developed complications during surgery. So ended up being in an intensive care unit, and that experience left me with OCD, which, for anyone who's not aware, OCD is obsessive compulsive disorder, and it means that I have intrusive thoughts such as something bad happening or me getting ill or making someone else unwell, and then I have to do ritualistic behaviors, which are things like asking for reassurance or washing my hands repeatedly, or even kind of doing things in a repetitive pattern. And this has been going on and on since I was 6 years old. I've had periods of being okay with it and living well with it, and then periods where it's really kind of controlled everything about my life. And I'm now understanding that some of that might also be down to autism and kind of the routine and structure that I need, and what happens when I can't follow that, and kind of the kind of neurological response that I have to stress in those situations when the routine and structure isn't there. And also kind of how I can also be really impulsive at times and then kind of throw me off course a little bit. But throughout this whole journey of dealing with OCD, since they're just 6, I've kind of also been bullied at school and kind of faced discrimination in the workplace and just along the way through society. And that's kind of opened my eyes up to the different models of disability. So that where the medical model says that me as a disabled person or me as with my neurodivergent behaviors, I need to be fixed to fit into the world. The social model says that I'm not the problem, the world around me is the problem. And without being too political, I think the news that we saw yesterday about the health secretary's comments around mental health being overdiagnosed and things like that, we see the same thing with ADHD and autism.
Where's streeting needs yeeting. Yeah.
I think I've seen so many journalists also tweeting about kind of misinformation around ADHD and what you're entitled to, and kind of that you get a free car and all this sort of thing. And I think that stereotype and that negative, like, perpetual motion of like, these are what disabled people are like, doesn't help our narrative and help generate the awareness that we need to have. Because I'm not going to get rid of my disability or my mental health or my neurodivergent behaviors. They're not going to go away. I'm going to have to learn to live with them. And I don't think that's a bad thing. I think that's a good thing, because if it wasn't for my OCD, I wouldn't have the empathy that I have. I wouldn't have the understanding of other people that I think is quite powerful now. And I've just started therapy again and talking to my therapist about things that kind of trigger me and how that actually helps my understanding of the world around me and stuff like that, and what I can do to actually be caring to myself. Because I think sometimes when we're neurodivergent and when we're constantly masking around other people, for me, like masking my OCD behaviors when I'm out in public, until I get home, like it's so overwhelming. When I get home, it's just a release of everything all at once. And I think that people don't often recognize that because we don't see what's going on behind the scenes for a lot of people. And I think as neurodivergent people, we often we think that we have to be perfect all the time and we have to portray ourselves as neurotypical. And I think sometimes self-compassion is so important. And I think that's something that I personally have had to learn to do a lot over the last 2-3 years, especially since like experiencing like hate crime because of my physical disability and how that's impacted on other aspects of my life. And also just being a public speaker, like you talk about these things that you don't think are triggering, and then you get off stage and you just, everything like that you've bottled up just overwhelms you. And for me, that like comes across in like needing to ask for reassurance. And like the other day I was in London doing a talk, and I had to read like on the app, it gave you the instructions of like the number plate for the vehicle you're looking for. And I was reading like to look for the vehicle name and model. And I didn't realize until I got in the taxi and I walked past him like 3 or 4 times. And he was like, I've seen you like walk past me 3 or 4 times. Like, are you okay? I was like, yeah, I'm just overwhelmed and a bit like everything's bottling up and I don't know what to do. And in that moment, I just told him what I was experiencing, and he didn't say anything. And I think like that might just be because he doesn't know how to respond, but also like I didn't need to hear anything back at that moment. And I think that's really powerful sometimes. Just have someone to listen and understand. And I think like I've tried to be a bit more, not pushing myself to the limit, but doing things that are kind of triggering. So I recently went and got a haircut in a barber's for the first time.
Looks good. Yeah, I noticed. Yeah.
And just being able to talk to a barber who isn't like trained in mental health, but my barber, he has been open about his mental health with me and stuff, and having that person to just talk to you for 45 minutes to an hour and just chat about life really helped to give that understanding of like it's okay not to have all the answers, like we've talked about already, and not to be perfect. Because I think sometimes when we celebrate mental health and celebrate neurodiversity, we have to think of all the positive things, but it's okay to think about the negative things sometimes, not to remind us of how bad we are or how we struggle, but just remember our limitations and kind of that self-care is important. I think I've made sense. I hope I have.
Yeah, that was brilliant. Yeah, sorry, I forgot to spotlight you earlier. Yeah,
that's right.
But yeah, definitely, I'm a big fan of the social model of disability, and we are not the problem. Absolutely. So there's a quote, I can't remember the guy's name who said it. It's on my LinkedIn, but if a flower fails to bloom, then you don't blame the flower, you change the environment that it's in. So I really subscribe to that, but it's quite difficult for me as a neurodiversity advocate, the fact that I use neuroaffirming language and I follow the principles of the social model of disability, But if you want to access any support, like access to work or PIP or anything like that, get a formal diagnosis, anything like that, you kind of have to switch to the medical pathology model, because you only meet the definition of disability under the Equality Act if you've got significant substantial impairments, deficits, all that negative stuff. So that can be really difficult when you're trying to challenge the stigma.
I think you're right.
Yeah, but at the end of the day, we're all humans, and every human has got things that they're particularly good at and things that they struggle with, things that they find difficult and need support with. And when you're neurodivergent, that is to a greater extent. So they call that the spiky profile when you're looking at neurodiversity inclusion in the workplace. If you want to benefit from the things we're particularly good at, then you need to be able to support us with the things that we struggle with and find difficult. And you can only do that if you create a culture of psychological safety where people can be open about their ideas and their struggles and their support needs.
I think you're right. And I think there's a quote that says that nothing about us without us within our community. I think that speaks so true, especially like this week. Like, if we're looking at how can we influence change around, like, there are flaws within the benefit system, but like, you don't make that change, you don't change policy, like you said, without including all disabled people, and that includes people with neurodivergent tendencies or behaviors, or however you want to label it. Or that's not going to happen. It's just going to segregate more people and make more people feel isolated and alone.
It's actually quite baffling what they're doing, because it's PIP, it's not an unemployment benefit. It's meant to help with the additional costs of having a disability. So the rationale that people get a diagnosis and they're on the unemployable scrap heap or something, and that means that they're overdiagnosed, is quite laughable. And there's not actually that many jobs to go around anyway. But anyway, thank you for that, Chandy. It's lovely to hear you talk. I follow you on social media. I think your content is brilliant.
No, thank you.
So it's great to have you here. Amit, over to you.
Thank you. So for me, I guess it's just an opportunity really to share a bit about my story and the kind of impact that being neurodivergent has had on me. So as I said before, I'm a former deputy head teacher in secondary education, and spending 10 years working in education, I worked with a number of young people that were, across the spectrum. But I was particularly interested in the ADHD because I would look at the way those children were behaving, look at the signs and the symptoms that they were sort of exhibiting, and think to myself, gosh, that's me. I do that. I struggle to concentrate in certain scenarios. I zone out in certain meetings. I have the urge to have to basically get up and walk out of long kind of, we used to have insets where there were long sessions on pedagogy and long sessions on teaching and learning, and I just, I couldn't cope. So I remember speaking to my colleagues and so on and saying, look, I think I might be ADHD. I'm really struggling with this. And I would get laughed out of the building. Don't be ridiculous. You're just trying to justify bad behavior. You're trying to justify your actions by saying that you're ADHD. You're definitely not ADHD. And so for many years, I just sort of fought this internal battle of, am I ADHD, or am I actually mad? Am I just sort of making this up? And it wasn't until last year that I finally plucked up the courage to go ahead with the kind of process of the diagnosis process of getting diagnosed for ADHD, because I just felt that I needed to know if I've got it. I don't know why I felt that way. I know there's lots of people out there that feel that they're not interested in getting a diagnosis. They're just content with what they think they might be. But for me, it was really important. I went through the process, and as we all know, quite a rigorous process. And it was no surprise to me that every single box of ADHD was ticked, and I had the additional diagnosis of OCD, which is something that I've had for a long time, and also anxiety disorder. And that whole process for me was kind of almost a justification, a vindication, of all the behaviors that I had demonstrated over the years and all the times that I had been shut down. It was telling me that actually I was always a little bit different, and being different is okay. It was just, and then I sort of made it my sort of pet project, I guess, because the work that I do is particularly around parents and parenting. But I wanted to now raise more awareness of what it means to have ADHD, but particularly in my own community. You know, as you can see, I'm a turban-wearing Sikh. I look a little bit different to most other people. And so for me, it was an opportunity to raise awareness of neurodiversity, and particularly ADHD in the South Asian community, in the Indian community, the Sikh community. Because when I was talking to sort of family and friends and other people in the community, a complete lack of understanding of what ADHD is. And when you try and speak to people in mother tongue, you know, my mother tongue is Punjabi, and when you try and speak to people in my own language, you know, there are words that are sort of ultimately not, you can't translate them. You know, so ADHD, neurodiversity, to find the literal translation for these words is either really difficult or impossible. So when you're trying to then sort of speak to people about neurodiversity, and I'm trying to talk to people about ADHD, it's become really, really difficult. So, you know, a lot of what I do, a lot of why I talk about ADHD and why I share my story and how it links into all the things that I've experienced in life, and in the work that I do in supporting parents, is because I want more and more people to understand what neurodiversity is. And I want more and more ethnic minority people to understand that, especially parents, and especially parents that might be first generation immigrants into this country, you know, to understand what it might mean to be neurodiverse yourself as a parent, but also, and to try and recognize the impact that has on your parenting, but also to try and recognize the signs and symptoms that your children or your child might be neurodiverse, and what you might want to do to change your parenting approach to support them and encourage them to flourish in, you know, this world that we live in, where neurodiversity is thankfully becoming more recognized and more respected and more understood. But we're still, I think, in my community, a million miles away from that. So really, any platform that I get to talk about neurodiversity as somebody that looks the way that I do, I jump on that platform, because I want more and more people that look like me to recognize the signs and symptoms, and I want more and more people that look like me to understand that it's perfectly normal to not be normal. It's perfectly okay to not be okay. You know, some of those cliches, and it's perfectly okay to talk about neurodiversity when you look a little bit different. So I've made that my kind of sort of, you know, side mission along with the parenting, to really just get on any platform that I can get onto and raise as much awareness as I possibly can about what it means to be neurodiverse, and why we need to do much more in talking about it from an intersectional and an ethnic minority perspective.
Fantastic. Thank you so much. I'm getting so many common themes here in today's live streams, because VJ, who spoke at 1:00, he was saying pretty much the same thing, but he's not from a Sikh community. His family speak Gujarati, and some of the terminology of the neurodiversity movement that he's learned, things like, say, I think his example was the word alexithymia, that's an autistic trait where you're not in touch with your feelings, you can't identify them and express them verbally. You still might be feeling them deep under the surface, but then you're not that in touch with them and you can't explain them. That's so we have a word for that in English, but there is no word for him to explain it to his family in Gujarati. So, and I've heard similar from other people as well, both from the Speakers Collective and the PSA. So I think we're really onto something here. But also, like Runa said, when you look at masking, so how much of that is actually masking neurodivergent traits, and how much of it is to do with cultural differences? For me, I've spent a large part of my life masking how queer I am, because I am bisexual and pansexual and gender non-conforming. I've always been a tomboy, so it's and then masking my autistic traits as well. And I have a mask as well when I can't be bothered to explain to people that I don't know that well about being a bereaved parent, and getting the sympathetic noises that people make when they hear that. So it's, I don't know where I'm going with this. It's a bit rambling, but there are so many layers to peel back before you get to who the person is underneath. we can quite often lose sight of it ourselves, I think, let alone show it to anybody else.
I mean, I wonder, I mean, and I don't know how others would feel about it, certainly you, Amit, because we talked about, and please do put Bengali people in that mix that you talked about, because again, in our language, we don't have any words. In fact, I was just, as you were talking, Google translating some of those words.
Yeah, we need a glossary, I think.
It honestly was hilarious, some of the words that were coming out. For ADHD was like this essay. I couldn't even read it. But, one of the things that I certainly find amongst myself and like peers, siblings, family, friends from the South Asian communities, that perfection is the minimum standard. And that gets rooted into our psyche so early on that, like there's, that talk about this thing about acquired neurodivergence and,
Yes.
and that sometimes like the way our brains are formed, it could be through something like OCD for it or whatever, it lends to that definition. And when I was reading about it, I was just laughing, thinking, oh, so actually how we're even brought up is also, do you know what I mean? Like,
yes. Yeah, it forges neural pathways. Definitely. Yeah.
And, it's just, it's a lot. It is a lot, to be honest.
Yeah, it is. I meant to come back to you earlier, actually, after your talk earlier, about the trauma, neurodivergence versus trauma things. So there are quite a lot of people in the neurodiversity movement who get very upset when there's an implication that our neurodivergence is caused by trauma, and a lot of acknowledgement that the reverse is true. So if you're neurodivergent, then you're not only more vulnerable to trauma, but it's more likely to have a detrimental effect on your mental health. So I'm diagnosed with complex PTSD, and I think that I've been vulnerable to that, not just because I've spent 42 years trying to lead a normal life when I'm actually far from normal, but also because of things like my near photographic memory and near perfect memory for what people say to me as well. So it's almost like my trauma gets immortalized and grows into something much bigger and scarier than it should have been. So, and then with that, we get the hypervigilance, which Chandy touched on earlier. And yeah, it's the two become so intertwined. I don't think you can really separate them, but it does mean that our minds work in very different ways than somebody who is normal, typically wired, and isn't exposed to a lot of trauma throughout their lives.
Yeah.
That was quite a big ramble, but does anyone want to add to that?
But I think just to go back to what Runa was saying about cultural kind of issues, I think what I found when I got the diagnosis, when I sort of spoke to family and friends about it, and I've shared it on my social media channels. It forms part of who I am. It forms part of my whole work, I guess. It's the sort of almost indifference, which in some ways was welcomed because I'm just me. They know me as who I am. They've known me since childhood as who I am. But it was also, I felt the sort of the lack of understanding that some of my behaviors, if you want to call them poor behaviors, as a result of the ADHD, were just not understood. I interrupt people a lot, and I'm trying really hard in this sort of session not to interrupt. But that is a kind of quite a common trait of people with ADHD. I'm on my phone a lot when people are talking to me. And part of that is I'm addicted to my phone. That's a separate conversation, but it's also because I just zone out. And if I don't have the kind of willpower to be engaged in the conversation, I will just zone out. Call it rude, call it whatever you like, but I put it down to the fact that
I'm never going to call that rude. So that would be a really neuronormative standard.
Yeah,
so.
and I think that kind of lack of understanding, I think, from people in my community and indeed beyond, I think that's not just limited to my community, it's limited to all communities actually, but I can only talk about my experience within my community. I just think that is something that's bothered me a little bit. It's that complete kind of disregard. Oh, you've got ADHD, right? We can't see anything. We can't see anything different about you, and therefore, as far as we're concerned, there is nothing different about you. You're just a bit silly. You're just a bit rude. You're just a bit temperamental. You're just a bit impatient. But actually, it's not understanding why I might be a little bit or come across rude, or I might be a bit impatient, or I might be a bit temperamental. And that I found quite challenging, and I like to sort of speak about that, because that back to what Runa was saying about expecting perfection, that is something that ADHD people just cannot necessarily control. And it's about being understood, and it's about, understanding that that's what people are without thinking that they're being necessarily rude. That's been a big challenge of mine.
Totally agree with you. And I would really love to do more of the kind of educating where people who are not neurodivergent can understand what it is to be inside our heads, what it is to live like we do. And I know simulations have existed I think there's simulations that try to depict what it's like if you're autistic and don't have any sensory filter, and it really exaggerates all the different noises and lights and things. But I would like people to understand what it's like to have so many different thought processes going on at once, and to have a good idea in one thought process and then need to get it out because otherwise you might lose it. You have two good ideas and they ricochet off each other and smash into smithereens, so you've got to catch them quick. And all that, I'd really love people to understand if they haven't been there.
I think when Amit was talking, I was just like looking at my hands. I've got my like anti-bac gel and I'm playing with it and like shaking it about and like doing that.
I'm stimming with beads under the desk
Yeah.
as well. Yeah.
I think the idea that I think neurodivergency is seen as like a trend. I don't know if you guys feel the same way, but like, especially in the media and stuff, like
I've never been trendy in my life.
Trend. And I think that
Yeah.
that idea is like not just in our generation, it's in previous generations. Like I remember like people in my life telling me like, oh, if you just think positive, that it'll be okay, or like using that kind of mindset. And to an extent I do like that mindset. Motivation is helpful in some situations, but when you're neurodivergent or when you're disabled, I think that kind of makes you feel like your thoughts are not valid, and like it's just like you're being silly or you're being stupid, when actually you're dealing with a lot. And like I saw a TikTok video, I learned everything from TikTok, and it was like someone like joking about the fact that they were like, do you guys hear voices in your head? Like, do you hear your voice back to you and like hear like an internal monologue and stuff like that? And I'm like, yeah, I do.
What kind of weirdo doesn't?
And I'm like, who wouldn't?
Yeah.
And I didn't realize that was a new neurodivergent thing, like not hearing a voice, like hearing yourself in your head, talking to yourself, and all these different things. And I was like, actually, like it's empowering to learn that you're neurodivergent. It makes you feel like you're part of a community as well. And I think the fact that we're all here today talking about our experiences, and I think shows that we're not alone. And I think often when you think about disability, or like growing up, I used to think that I was on my own because no one else had OCD. But like you learn that actually there's a wider community beyond like school or beyond your community of people who are actually affected by it.
Yeah, I know quite a few people with OCD, but there's a huge correlation between that and autism. But I was going to say, when I discovered that I was neurodivergent, it brought to an end a period of 15 years where I felt like just a rubbish adult and a failure and broken and defective and not good enough and unacceptable. So I suddenly understood that there's a concrete reason why I struggle with things that my intellectual peers might find easier. Even things like meeting new people, or at university, it was things like joining the computer room in the library. Just stuff that other adults can do that I somehow failed at because I was a crap adult and a rubbish human being. And then I'd discover, actually, no, I'm autistic, and because of that, I've got a bunch of positive traits which make me really shit hot at my job. I do have some things that I find difficult, and I need support with, and understanding and patience and compassion. But that doesn't mean that I'm a less of a human being. It's not a value judgment. It's not a moral judgment. It's just who I am, how I'm built, and deal with it. So it was absolutely transformative to me. Of course, it didn't explain everything, because then I've later found out that I've got ADHD as well. And the beauty of that is there's a medication that I can take that helps me to focus and helps me to cope with life. So it doesn't take away my ADHD, like putting in my contact lenses doesn't take away my short-sightedness, but it does enable me to cope better with life and see things more clearly. So I'm an absolute real strong advocate for going for a later in life diagnosis if you think you might be neurodivergent. So yeah, it's really changed my life.
And I absolutely hear that, because it's the same thing for me. Like all my life, literally, and like I'm 43 years old. For most of that, I literally just felt out of place, unseen, misunderstood. And as soon as I started to understand, okay, this is what's going on for me, it was almost like I was in a state of curiosity and wonder. And it's not to kind of diminish like the hardships and the struggles or anything like that, but a part of me just wants to stay in that state of wonder and curiosity, because oh right, okay, so it works like this, works like that. And sometimes I make myself laugh at how ridiculous like certain things are, and I love solo trips, because I totally hear you, Chandy. I have lots of like people in my head that in a narrative, and so I could be sitting there in a cafe again, but there's a whole sort of like really colorful conversation happening, and I'm like an observer eavesdropping. It's a great place to be, but the truth of the matter is that earlier when you were saying that it'd be great for neurotypical people to get an understanding of what our brains can feel like, sometimes, and a lot of times, I've wished that I could experience what a neurotypical brain could feel like, to just not have to, I don't know, get stuck in things, forget things over, the constant, like that all the time. Do you know what I mean? Like,
I do, yeah. I mean, when I first tried ADHD medication, and it's before I was prescribed it, but it was quite eye-opening to me, because suddenly it was like I could see clearly and realise that I'd been stuck in a job that was making me miserable, and that I've got loads of creative ideas, and that I want to talk and write and paint and play guitar, and really soon after that I handed in my notice on a job where it was a great bunch of people and I supported what they were trying to do, but we were so under-resourced. Everyone was just constantly overwhelmed to the point of unable to cope. And I was going to bed on a Sunday night full of dread about what might be in my inbox on the Monday morning. And I quit to go self-employed, and I've never been happier. So it's like I had that moment of clarity, and I almost thought, is this what it's like to be neurotypical? but possibly not. Yeah, I'll never know what it's like for them. They'll never know what it's like for me. But if people can just really try to listen and believe us, and just try and understand our perspective, and know that we're not making a fuss about nothing, and like if a light is too bright, or if an air conditioning unit is making a noise that I can't stand, that I've probably been uncomfortable for quite some time before I've even said anything. So yeah, listen to us and believe us.
Yeah.
Well, that was quite a ramble again. It's no wonder I've been losing my voice in meetings. So does anyone else have anything to say, or shall we wrap it up now?
I just wanted to come in really, I think what's so lovely about today, and really about, when you find somebody else that's gone through something similar, how just that can really help, so you don't feel so alone. And I think that is what can be the biggest challenge, I think, for if you're struggling. And so I think it's not to devalue, at all how important it is that we do share our lived experience to hopefully help others, and find other people that can relate, that can understand. I think, as I say, I kind of worry about so many young people that feel alone, that don't necessarily have those voices, and to of support that's out there, and
the community is
so
really
important.
So yeah, when I discovered the actually autistic community online and the neurodiversity community, it really turned my life around. And it's one of the reasons that I do what I do now, and why I've put these sessions together today, even though I'm crazy busy with paid talks as well. It really matters. I think we can really make a positive change in society and help people to feel less alone, less broken, and more like they're different, and different is okay.
Yeah, agree.
On that note, I think we'll say goodbye, and I'll go and chill out before tomorrow's very busy day. But thank you so much for being here, and John, thank you for all your work with the Speakers Collective, and it's a fantastic community to be part of. Please, viewers, please follow us all and follow the Speakers Collective on YouTube and on the social media, and yeah, let's do more of this.
Thank you. Thanks.
Thanks again, Charlie.
Thank you, Charlie. Thank you
Thank
all.
you, Charlie.